Welcome back, dear Acolyte. I am pleased to see you again. Across Tamriel, a storm is gathering, one that doesn't roar with thunder, but moves with the quiet precision of a blade in the dark. They are known as the Thalmor, champions of Elven supremacy, enforcers of a new world order, and the architects of a vision that could reshape the very essence of the Empire. But who are these figures whose influence spreads with such cold determination? What lies behind their polished diplomacy and golden armor, and why does their power grow unchecked, casting a long and ominous shadow over all who oppose them? Tonight, we explore the rise of the Thalmor, uncovering their hidden motives, their history marked by both glory and ruthlessness, and their relentless quest for control. As we examine the true nature of this rising threat, it becomes clear that the Thalmor's ambitions reach far beyond politics, endangering the very future of Tamriel itself. So, stay with me, Acolyte, as we unravel the mystery of the Thalmor, a force whose golden hands may one day tighten their grip on an entire continent. The Aldmeri Dominion was forged in an era where the survival of Mer required a unifying power. In these times of chaos and decline, the Altmer, the High Elves of Somerset, began to realize their place in history was slipping away. The foundations of what would become the Thalmor were laid in response to a world that seemed to conspire against them, driven by the belief that their culture was under siege. The origins of the Thalmor cannot be understood without first considering the Altmer's deep connection to their homeland, Somerset, and their role in shaping Tamrielic history. The Altmer saw themselves as the purest descendants of the Aedra, the original divines, and thus considered themselves the rightful rulers of Nirn. This belief was deeply rooted in their culture and influenced their political and social structures. For centuries, the Altmer led insular lives, focusing on preserving their ancient traditions and maintaining the purity of their bloodlines. They were content in their isolation, viewing the affairs of the other races, particularly the humans, as beneath their concern. Yet, as history has shown time and again, isolation can breed vulnerability. The decline of the first Aldmeri Dominion marked a turning point for the Altmer. The great crystal tower, once the pinnacle of their civilization and a symbol of their unity, fell, leaving a profound vacuum of power. This loss, coupled with the growing threats from the rising human kingdoms and the chaotic forces of oblivion, forced the Altmer to reconsider their place in the world. They could no longer remain passive observers in the grand theater of Tamriel. They had to take action to secure their future. In this climate of uncertainty, the Thalmor emerged as a powerful political entity, driven by a vision of restoring Elven dominance. They were not a new creation, but rather an evolution of older, more traditional factions within Altmer society. The Thalmor were initially a group of radical thinkers who believed that the only way to protect the Altmer and their way of life was through direct intervention in the affairs of Tamriel. They saw the decline of the First Dominion not as a failure, but as a lesson that the Altmer must lead, not from behind the safety of their islands, but from the forefront of power. The early leadership of the Thalmor consisted of influential Altmer who were deeply committed to their cause. Figures such as Queen Irene, who later played a pivotal role in the formation of the Third Aldmeri Dominion, were instrumental in shaping the Thalmor's policies and strategies. Their initial goals were clear: to re-establish Elven supremacy, to reclaim the lost glories of the First Dominion, and to eliminate any threats to their vision of a unified Elven rule. They viewed themselves as the stewards of the true Aldmeri legacy, destined to guide not just the Altmer, but all of Tamriel, towards a future where the Mer, the rightful rulers of Nirn, would reclaim their dominance. In these early days, the Thalmor's rise was marked by a combination of political cunning and brute force. They understood that to achieve their goals, They needed to consolidate power within Somerset first, before extending their influence across Tamriel. The Thalmor were ruthless in their methods, silencing dissent within their ranks and eliminating any opposition that threatened their plans. Their ideology, which was steeped in a mix of Elven supremacy and religious fervor, resonated with many Aldmeri who feared the loss of their culture and identity in a rapidly changing world. The origins of the Thalmor are thus a story of a people who, facing the decline of their civilization, chose to fight back against the tides of history. They were driven by a deep-seated belief in their own superiority and a desire to restore what they saw as the natural order of the world. As the first Aldmeri Dominion crumbled under the weight of internal dissent and external pressures, the political landscape of the Somerset Isles was left in disarray. The power vacuum created by the fall of the Dominion was not merely a matter of shifting borders, but a profound disturbance in the very fabric of Aldmeri society. The once unified vision of Elven supremacy began to splinter, and the dream of a united Tamriel under Merish rule seemed all but lost. The remnants of the Dominion were scattered, with no clear leadership to guide the Aldmeri through these tumultuous times. The fall of the Crystal Tower, a symbol of the Aldmeri's ancient heritage and their connection to the divine, marked a significant turning point. This towering structure, revered as a monument to the spirit of the Elven people, had stood as a beacon of Aldmeri culture and power. Its destruction not only dealt a severe blow to the morale of the Aldmeri, but also signaled the end of an era. The tower's fall was more than a physical collapse. It represented the shattering of the Aldmeri's sense of invincibility and their divine right to rule. The loss of such a potent symbol left the Aldmeri reeling, searching for a new sense of identity and purpose. In the wake of these events, the Somerset Isles were rife with uncertainty. The once mighty Dominion was reduced to a shadow of its former self, and the Aldmeri found themselves vulnerable to both internal strife and external threats. The power vacuum that emerged was quickly filled by various factions, each vying for control and influence. The Thalmor, initially a fringe group with radical ideas about Elven supremacy, began to gain traction during this period of instability. Their message of reclaiming the glory of the Aldmeri and restoring their rightful place as rulers of Tamriel resonated with a population desperate for direction. As the Thalmor's influence grew, they capitalized on the weakened state of the Dominion and the Aldmeri's disillusionment with their current leaders. They positioned themselves as the saviors of Elven kind, promising to restore the honor and power of the Aldmeri by any means necessary. The Crystal Tower's fall and the subsequent power vacuum provided the perfect conditions for the Thalmor to rise to prominence, setting the stage for their eventual dominance over the Somerset Isles and beyond. The Thalmor began as a small faction within the Somerset Isles, initially perceived as little more than a group of radical nationalists. However, they quickly gained momentum by capitalizing on the widespread disillusionment among the Aldmeri. Key figures such as Narifin and Eldamil were instrumental in shaping the early Thalmor ideology, which revolved around the belief that the Aldmeri were the rightful rulers of Tamriel, and that the world had been corrupted by the influence of humans and their false gods. As the Thalmor solidified their power, they began to attract a following among the Aldmeri elite. Many of these early supporters were disillusioned by the failures of the First Dominion and were eager to see a return to the days when the Aldmeri were the undisputed masters of Tamriel. The Thalmor's early leadership was characterized by a blend of religious zealotry and political pragmatism. They were determined to reshape the world in their image, and they believed that the ends justified any means necessary. The Thalmor's initial goals were both ambitious and clear: to re-establish the Aldmeri Dominion as the dominant power in Tamriel, to eliminate any threats to their supremacy, and to purge the world of what they saw as the corrupting influence of human culture and religion. They viewed the Empire as a direct threat to their goals and sought to weaken it through both overt and covert means. Their ideology was deeply rooted in the belief that the Aldmeri were not only superior to humans, but also destined to rule over them. These early Thalmor were ruthless in their pursuit of power. They were willing to use any means necessary to achieve their goals, including assassination, manipulation, and propaganda. They were also adept at exploiting the weaknesses of their enemies, particularly the fractured state of the Empire following the Oblivion Crisis. By the time they had fully established themselves as the ruling power in the Somerset Isles, the Thalmor had already begun to lay the groundwork for the reformation of the Aldmeri Dominion and the eventual conquest of Tamriel. Their view on the relations between humans and Mer was stark and unyielding. To the Thalmor, humans were a lesser species, an unfortunate deviation from the true path of creation. They believed that the existence of humans was a cosmic error, one that had diluted the divine essence of Nirn. This belief extended to their disdain for Talos, a human who ascended to godhood, which they saw as a blasphemous affront to the natural order. The Thalmor's ideological framework was also deeply entwined with their understanding of the Aedra and Daedra. They revered the Aedra as the creators and sustainers of the world, though their veneration was selective, favoring those deities who embodied the virtues they held dear: order, purity, and the preservation of their cultural heritage. The Daedra, in contrast, were viewed with suspicion and fear, seen as chaotic forces that threatened the order they sought to impose. Their interpretation of history was heavily revisionist, designed to reinforce their belief in the inevitability of Aldmeri dominance. The Thalmor propagated a narrative that cast the Aldmeri Dominion as the true inheritors of Nirn, downplaying or outright denying the contributions and achievements of the human empires that had risen and fallen throughout Tamriel's history. This version of history was taught rigorously in the institutions under their control, ensuring that future generations of Aldmeri would internalize these beliefs as unquestionable truths. The Thalmor's interpretation of history is not merely an academic exercise. It is a deliberate and calculated endeavor to shape the very foundation of reality within the Aldmeri Dominion. The Thalmor seized upon the malleable nature of history, reinterpreting events to cast the Aldmeri as the rightful rulers of Tamriel, chosen by divine providence. This narrative, propagated through all forms of communication, seeks to cement their authority and justify their actions, no matter how draconian. The Thalmor's revisionist approach often involved the careful selection of historical events and figures, elevating those that aligned with their vision while obscuring or outright erasing those that did not. Their scholars meticulously crafted a version of history that painted the rise of the Aldmeri Dominion as an inevitable and necessary course correction in the chaotic world of Tamriel. They portrayed the Mer as the rightful stewards of the world, with the Thalmor as the vanguard of this ancient destiny, destined to restore order to a land plagued by the folly of men. This narrative of legitimacy was further bolstered by the use of historical myths and legends, which were repurposed to serve the Thalmor's goals. Ancient tales of Aldmeri heroes and the glory of the Somerset Isles were revived and retold with a distinctly Thalmor twist, emphasizing themes of superiority and divine right. The Thalmor harnessed these stories to cultivate a sense of pride and inevitability among their followers, while also instilling fear and obedience in those who might dare to oppose them. By controlling the narrative of history, the Thalmor not only sought to rewrite the past, but also to dictate the future, ensuring that their vision of Tamriel would prevail. In this pursuit, the Thalmor's manipulation of history became a powerful tool of propaganda, used to rally their supporters and intimidate their enemies. The collapse of the Second Dominion left the Aldmeri vulnerable to other races and the loss of their influence. Yet the Thalmor, driven by their conviction of Elven superiority, viewed this as a moment to reassert their dominance. With their rigid ideology and fervent ambition, they began the groundwork for a new dominion. Key events leading to the formation of the Third Dominion involved a blend of strategic alliances, military actions, and political manipulation. The Thalmor understood the necessity of both strength and diplomacy, forging alliances with crucial factions to secure their goals. They allied with the Bosmer of Valenwood, integrating their forested homeland into the Dominion through the Pact of the Green Lady. This alliance was not born of mutual respect, but of the Thalmor's strategic need for the Bosmer's resources and tactical positioning. The Khajiit of Elsewhere also came under their influence, with the Thalmor capitalizing on a lunar crisis to present themselves as saviors, thus bringing Elsewhere into the Dominion through political subjugation and religious manipulation. Queen Irene, a charismatic and idealistic leader, played a vital role in the reformation of the Dominion. Her vision of a united Tamriel under the Dominion's banner resonated with many Altmer. However, it was the Thalmor who truly held the reins, guiding her every move to align with their broader agenda. Figures like Ankano and other key Thalmor operatives worked behind the scenes, ensuring that Queen Irene's decisions furthered their ultimate goal of restoring Elven dominance across Tamriel. Under this orchestrated leadership, the Third Aldmeri Dominion rose from the ashes of its predecessor, stronger, more determined, and backed by powerful allies. Emerging from the remnants of the Second Dominion, the Thalmor's calculated strategy to restore Altmer dominance relied not only on military might, but also on shrewd diplomacy. Their ascent was as much a matter of tactical genius as it was of ideological zeal. Military force became a key tool for the Thalmor as they sought to expand their influence beyond the borders of Somerset. The Dominion's armies, composed of elite Altmer warriors and battle mages, were instrumental in asserting control over Valenwood and Elsewhere. The Thalmor were not content with mere conquest. They sought to reshape these lands in their image, enforcing their laws, culture, and ideology on the subjugated populations. This militaristic approach was complemented by carefully crafted alliances with key figures and factions within these regions, ensuring that resistance was minimized and loyalty to the Dominion was secured. Diplomacy played an equally vital role in the Thalmor's expansionist agenda. They were acutely aware that brute force alone would not secure their dominance in Tamriel. Through a series of strategic marriages, pacts, and negotiations, the Thalmor extended their influence into the courts of other nations. Their diplomatic efforts were often backed by the implicit threat of military action, a tactic that proved highly effective in bending the wills of weaker rulers. A pinnacle of their diplomatic efforts was the negotiation of the White Gold Concordat with the Mede Empire. The treaty, which officially ended the Great War, was a masterstroke of Thalmor strategy. Though it required significant sacrifices on both sides, the Concordat solidified the Dominion's power and, more importantly, outlawed the worship of Talos within the Empire. This provision, while seemingly minor, was a critical component of the Thalmor's broader ideological campaign to erase the influence of the so-called Ninth Divine from Tamriel. The enforcement of this ban became a cornerstone of Thalmor policy, leading to widespread persecution of Talos worshippers and further entrenching their power within the Empire's borders. The Thalmor's rise was met with a mix of fear and resistance. In Cyrodiil, the Empire found itself reeling from the loss of the Great War. The White Gold Concordat became a bitter symbol of the Empire's weakening power. The Thalmor's presence in imperial territories, enforcing the ban on Talos worship, was a constant reminder of the Dominion's influence. This control extended into the highest levels of the Empire's government, where Thalmor agents manipulated politics to further their own goals. The impact on local politics was profound, In Skyrim, the enforced ban on Talos worship became a rallying cry for rebellion. The Nords, fiercely independent and proud of their heritage, saw the Thalmor as foreign oppressors. This resentment would eventually ignite the flames of civil war, with the Stormcloaks rising against what they perceived as the Empire's betrayal. Elsewhere in Tamriel, the Thalmor's influence sowed discord and unrest, destabilizing regions that had once been firm in their loyalty to the Empire. The Thalmor's influence also permeated societal norms and religious practices. In regions under their control, the worship of Talos was not merely outlawed, it was actively persecuted. Thalmor justiciars, roving enforcers of the Dominion's will, patrolled the roads, hunting down those who defied their edicts. The fear of these enforcers spread, silencing opposition and driving Talos worship underground. Temples were desecrated, and relics of Talos were destroyed or hidden away. This religious persecution left scars on the collective psyche of those who had once worshipped freely, deepening the divide between the Thalmor and the people they sought to rule. The Thalmor's impact extended beyond mere political and religious control. They sought to reshape the cultural landscape of Tamriel, imposing their own values and ideals. In education, art, and literature, the Thalmor promoted an Aldmeri-centric view of history and society, erasing or rewriting the contributions of other races. This cultural imperialism aimed to create a Tamriel more aligned with the Thalmor's vision of mere superiority. But it also sparked resistance from those who valued their own traditions and histories. In some regions, underground movements emerged, dedicated to preserving their cultural heritage in defiance of Thalmor influence. In the negotiations that led to the White Gold Concordat, the fate of Tamriel was decided in shadowy halls and behind closed doors. The Empire, weakened by the ravages of the Great War, found itself at the mercy of the Aldmeri Dominion. The Thalmor, relentless in their pursuit of dominion over Tamriel, saw this as their moment to strike a decisive blow against their enemies, both political and religious. The treaty's key terms, dictated by the Dominion with ruthless efficiency, stripped the Empire of much of its power. The outlawing of Talos worship was not merely a concession, it was a calculated attack on the very identity of the Nords, a people who revered Talos as their god-hero. The Thalmor insisted on this provision, not only to weaken the Empire, but to assert their own ideological supremacy. The Empire, under Emperor Titus Mede II, had little choice but to comply, knowing that refusal would mean continued bloodshed and likely total defeat. The negotiations themselves were a masterclass in Thalmor diplomacy. They offered the Empire just enough to survive, but at a cost that would fracture its unity and sow seeds of rebellion. The Aldmeri Dominion's negotiators, led by cunning and skilled diplomats, knew precisely how to exploit the Empire's desperation. The result was a treaty that favored the Dominion in every way, from territorial gains to the crippling restrictions imposed on the Empire's religious practices. Public reaction to the treaty was immediate and visceral. In Cyrodiil, the heart of the Empire, there was a sense of humiliation and betrayal. Many saw the Concordat as a stain on the honor of the Empire, a capitulation to an enemy they had fought so fiercely. In Skyrim, the reaction was even more intense. The Nords, with their deep reverence for Talos, were outraged. To them, the White Gold Concordat was not just a political agreement. It was an attack on their very way of life. This anger would soon ignite into open rebellion with the rise of the Stormcloaks under Ulfric's Stormcloak. The Thalmor, however, viewed the Concordat as a triumph. They had achieved through diplomacy what they could not fully accomplish through war: the subjugation of the Empire and the imposition of their will on Tamriel. For the Thalmor, this was not just a political victory, but a step closer to their ultimate goal, the domination of all Tamriel under the rule of the Aldmeri Dominion. The enforcement of the treaty's terms was not limited to religious persecution. The Thalmor extended their influence into the political and military spheres, ensuring that Skyrim remained under their watchful eye. They positioned themselves as both enforcers and overseers, manipulating imperial officials and sowing discord where it served their interests. The presence of Thalmor agents in the courts of Skyrim's Jarls further inflamed tensions, as Nords bristled at the intrusion of Elven authority into their traditional ways. Public and political reactions to the White Gold Concordat varied across Skyrim. While some Jarls, eager to maintain peace and avoid further conflict with the Dominion, complied with the treaty's terms, others resisted, seeing it as a betrayal of their culture and heritage. Ulfric Stormcloak, Jarl of Windhelm, emerged as a leading voice of dissent, his defiance of the Thalmor's edicts fueling the fires of rebellion. To many Nords, the Concordat was not merely a treaty, but a symbol of the Empire's weakness and the Thalmor's overreach. This growing discontent laid the groundwork for the civil war that would soon engulf Skyrim, a conflict in which the Thalmor played a more insidious role than many realized. In the early years of Skyrim's civil war, the Thalmor's role was subtle, yet profound. The Thalmor did not merely observe from afar. They actively stoked the flames of rebellion, ensuring that the conflict grew into a full-blown war. Their involvement was shrouded in secrecy, hidden behind political maneuvers and shadowy agents. The Empire's response to the Stormcloak rebellion was swift but divided. General Tullius, a seasoned military leader, was dispatched to Skyrim to quash the uprising. However, his task was far from easy. The Thalmor's influence extended into the ranks of the Empire's soldiers, sowing distrust and uncertainty. This internal discord, coupled with the Thalmor's covert support of the Stormcloaks, ensured that the conflict would drag on, draining both sides of their strength and resources. Throughout the war, the Thalmor's presence was felt in every corner of Skyrim. Their agents moved silently among the people, manipulating events to suit their agenda, while the Nords and Imperials fought bitterly over the future of their land. The Thalmor watched with cold detachment, knowing that no matter the outcome, they would be the true victors. In the bitter cold of Skyrim, where the winds howl through the ancient mountains and the forests stand as silent sentinels, the Thalmor's presence was more than a shadow. It was a force, an iron grip tightening around the throat of a divided land. The civil war that erupted in Skyrim was not merely a clash of ideals between the Stormcloaks and the Empire. It was a battlefield where the Thalmor's influence, cunning, and malice played out in ways that many failed to see. While the Nords fought for their beliefs, the Thalmor watched, manipulated, and maneuvered, their actions shaping the course of the conflict as much as any battle or siege. The Thalmor, under the guise of diplomatic emissaries, were anything but neutral in the war. They had a vested interest in the Empire's victory, yet at the same time, they subtly fanned the flames of rebellion. By ensuring that the civil war continued, the Thalmor weakened both the Stormcloaks and the Empire, draining their resources and morale. This strategy was brilliantly executed, with agents like Elenwen, the Thalmor ambassador in Skyrim, orchestrating events behind the scenes. The Thalmor played a delicate game, ensuring that neither side gained the upper hand too quickly, thereby prolonging the conflict and keeping both factions embroiled in bloodshed and strife. Thalmor justiciars patrolled the roads, enforcing the terms of the White Gold Concordat with ruthless efficiency. They hunted down Talos worshippers, interrogated suspects, and executed those who defied their authority. But their presence was not just about enforcing laws, it was about sowing fear and discord. The justiciars were a symbol of Thalmor power and a constant reminder of the Dominion's reach. Their actions in Skyrim were part of a larger strategy to destabilize the province from within, making it easier for the Thalmor to exert control once the dust of the civil war settled. Key figures in the Thalmor's Skyrim operations included agents like Aldmeri, stationed in Markarth, who oversaw the persecution of Talos worshippers in the Reach. His arrogance and disdain for the Nords were palpable, and his presence in the city was a testament to the Thalmor's influence over the Empire's puppet government. Aldmeri, like many Thalmor, believed in the inherent superiority of the Altmer and saw the Nords as little more than rebellious children in need of discipline. This attitude fueled the resentment and hatred that many in Skyrim felt toward the Thalmor, further driving the wedge between the Nords and the Empire. The resolution of the civil war in Skyrim marked a turning point, not only for the province itself, but also for the Thalmor and their overarching ambitions in Tamriel. As the conflict drew to a close, the Thalmor, ever calculating, began to assess the outcomes and reposition themselves within the shifting power dynamics of a war-torn Skyrim. In the final stages of the war, the Thalmor's influence was undeniable, though often shrouded in subtlety and indirect manipulation. The Stormcloaks, emboldened by their desire for independence and the restoration of Talos worship, had effectively weakened the Imperial presence in Skyrim. The Empire, already compromised by the White Gold Concordat, found itself fighting a war on two fronts, one with the Stormcloaks and the other with the lingering spectre of Thalmor oversight. The Thalmor, for their part, carefully navigated these turbulent waters, ensuring that whichever side emerged victorious, their objectives would remain within reach. As the final battles raged and the civil war drew to its inevitable conclusion, the Thalmor were quick to adjust their strategies. They had covertly supported the continuation of the conflict, knowing that a weakened Skyrim, divided and ravaged by war, would be easier to manipulate. Whether through espionage, political pressure, or direct intervention, the Thalmor played both sides, ensuring that neither could achieve a decisive victory without heavy cost. This strategy, though ruthless, proved effective, leaving Skyrim fractured and its people weary of further conflict. The aftermath of the war saw the Thalmor solidifying their position in Skyrim. With the White Gold Concordat still in effect, they continued their relentless persecution of Talos worshippers, using the weakened state of the province to further enforce their draconian policies. The presence of Thalmor justiciars increased as they took advantage of the chaos to root out any remaining dissent. Their actions were met with both fear and resentment, but the Thalmor were undeterred, their focus on maintaining control unwavering. The legacy of the Civil War, however, was not one of complete victory for the Thalmor. The war had sown deep divisions within Skyrim, and the resentment toward the Thalmor only grew in the years that followed. While they had succeeded in weakening the province and furthering their control, they had also created a breeding ground for future resistance. The Nords, proud and resilient, began to harbor a deep-seated hatred for the Thalmor, one that would simmer beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to ignite. In the wake of the Civil War, Skyrim remained a province on the edge, caught between the demands of the Empire and the ever-present threat of Thalmor oppression. The Thalmor's position, though strong, was not unassailable, and the legacy of the Civil War ensured that their control would always be met with resistance, both overt and covert. The Thalmor, however, were patient, ever watchful for the next opportunity to tighten their grip on Skyrim. The Thalmor's plans for expansion in Tamriel were multifaceted and meticulously executed. They sought to re-establish the dominance of the Aldmeri Dominion, not just as a political entity, but as the supreme power in Tamriel. This vision was bolstered by their belief that the Thalmor were the rightful heirs to the legacy of the Aeliads, the ancient rulers of Cyrodiil, To achieve this, they employed a combination of military might, political manipulation, and cultural assimilation, aiming to bring other provinces under their control or influence. Key strategies of the Thalmor included fostering unrest and exploiting weaknesses in other regions. In Hammerfell, they incited and supported the uprising of the Red Guards against the Empire, aiming to weaken both the Empire and Hammerfell. In Cyrodiil, they sowed discord among the nobility, using espionage and assassinations to destabilize the imperial government. Meanwhile, in Morrowind, they subtly supported the House Telvanni's ambitions, hoping to create a divided and weakened province that would be easier to manipulate. The Thalmor's ambitions were not without opposition. The Empire, though weakened, remained a formidable obstacle. The Red Guards, who fiercely defended their independence, thwarted the Thalmor's plans in Hammerfell. In Cyrodiil, the Blades, though diminished in number, continued to resist Thalmor influence, working in the shadows to protect the remnants of the Empire. Meanwhile, in Morrowind, the Dunmer proved to be a resilient people, unwilling to bend to Thalmor pressure. However, the Thalmor were nothing if not adaptable. They adjusted their strategies, turning to diplomatic means when force failed, and using cultural influence where politics and warfare could not reach. Their propaganda efforts were widespread, aiming to rewrite the history of Tamriel to favor their narrative. Through this, they sought to legitimize their rule and undermine the cultural identities of the other races, promoting the idea that the Aldmeri Dominion was the natural and rightful ruler of Tamriel. Their ambitions were not only territorial, but also cultural and religious. The Thalmor sought to impose their own beliefs and values on the rest of Tamriel, particularly their rejection of Talos and the divines associated with the Empire. This was not just an attack on religious freedom, but an effort to erase the cultural and spiritual identities of the other races, replacing them with the Thalmor's own ideology. The reaction of other Tamrielic powers to the Thalmor's expansionist policies was mixed. Some, like the Argonians of Black Marsh, remained largely indifferent, content to maintain their independence and isolation. The Thalmor's ambitions reach into the heartlands of Elsewhere and Valenwood, regions renowned for their unique cultures and resilient inhabitants. In Valenwood, the verdant realm of the Bosmer, the Thalmor sought to weave their influence into the very fabric of local governance. They presented themselves as benevolent overseers, offering economic incentives and political alliances to sway the Bosmeri leaders towards the Dominion's agenda. Through strategic marriages and alliances, the Thalmor embedded themselves within the noble houses, subtly steering decisions that would align Valenwood's policies with Aldmeri interests. This manipulation often went unnoticed, masked by the Bosmer's natural inclination towards diplomacy and balance. However, beneath the surface of these diplomatic overtures lay a more insidious strategy. The Thalmor capitalized on existing tensions and disputes within Valenwood, exacerbating conflicts to weaken local resistance. By supporting certain factions over others, they ensured that no single group could gain enough power to challenge their overarching influence. This divide-and-conquer approach not only destabilized the region, but also made it easier for the Dominion to assert control without facing unified opposition. The Thalmor's presence in Valenwood was thus a double-edged sword, offering stability on one hand, while dismantling the very structures that could resist their dominance on the other. In Elsewhere, the land of the Khajiit, the Thalmor employed a different set of tactics, tailored to the unique societal structures of the region. They leveraged the Khajiit's intricate trade networks, integrating Thalmor agents into key positions within the caravan systems. This allowed them to monitor and control the flow of goods and information, ensuring that any dissent could be swiftly identified and suppressed. Moreover, the Thalmor exploited cultural festivals and religious ceremonies to subtly introduce Aldmeri ideologies, fostering a sense of loyalty and dependence among the Khajiit populace. By aligning themselves with the spiritual leaders of elsewhere, the Thalmor secured a foothold in both the economic and spiritual lives of the Khajiit, making their influence pervasive and deeply rooted. In Valenwood, local governance became increasingly entangled with dominion policies, leading to a gradual erosion of traditional Bosmeri autonomy. The introduction of Aldmeri laws and regulations often clashed with long-standing customs, creating a sense of cultural dissonance among the populace. This not only bred resentment, but also fueled underground resistance movements that sought to preserve Valenwood's heritage. The Thalmor responded to these uprisings with a combination of coercion and propaganda, painting the resistance as threats to stability and progress. This cycle of control and resistance entrenched the Thalmor's presence, making it an integral yet controversial part of Valenwood's political landscape. In elsewhere, the societal impact was equally significant. The Thalmor's manipulation of trade and religious practices disrupted traditional Khajiiti ways of life, leading to economic disparities and social unrest. The integration of Aldmeri ideologies into religious ceremonies created internal conflicts within the community, as some Khajiit embraced the changes while others clung to their ancestral beliefs. This cultural tug-of-war weakened the social cohesion of elsewhere, making it easier for the Thalmor to exert their influence without facing a united front. Additionally, the control over trade networks allowed the Thalmor to siphon resources away from local economies, further increasing their leverage over the region's governance and society. The Thalmor's influence in Elsewhere and Valenwood was a crucial component of the Aldmeri Dominion's broader expansionist strategy. By securing control over these regions, the Thalmor not only extended the Dominion's territorial reach, but also reinforced its dominance through economic and cultural integration. Valenwood's lush forests and Elsewhere's bustling trade routes became vital assets in the Dominion's quest for supremacy, providing both resources and strategic advantages. The seamless integration of these regions into the Dominion's framework demonstrated the Thalmor's adeptness at balancing overt control with subtle manipulation, ensuring that their influence was both pervasive and resilient. Moreover, the success of the Thalmor's strategies in Elsewhere and Valenwood served as a model for their operations in other regions. The lessons learned from these endeavors informed their approaches in subsequent territories, refining their methods of political infiltration, economic manipulation, and cultural assimilation. However, long before the Thalmor began their rise to power, the Psijic Order stood as the quiet guardians of knowledge and wisdom. From the Isle of Artium, we played a crucial role in guiding Altmer society, offering counsel to kings and shaping the course of history not through force, but through the old ways. Our philosophy has always centered on balance, harmony, and the pursuit of a deeper understanding, a path that diverged sharply from the rigid authoritarian ambitions of the Thalmor. Our relationship with the Thalmor has always been complex. While they sought to dominate and control, we valued wisdom and guidance. The Thalmor, ever watchful in their quest for absolute power, saw us as a potential threat. Our influence and mastery of mysticism, something they could never fully grasp or command. Yet they recognized our worth in matters where their power alone would not suffice. There were times when they sought our counsel, knowing that our understanding of the old ways could serve their purposes. But this cooperation was fraught with tension. The Thalmor could not tolerate any philosophy that did not align with their own, and our refusal to submit to their ideology was seen as a challenge, a defiance that, in their eyes, could not go unchecked. Throughout the ages, our interactions with the Thalmor have been marked by both conflict and uneasy cooperation. They have attempted to suppress us, seeing our influence as a barrier to their ambitions. And yet, there have been moments when even they had to admit their need for our wisdom, especially in matters of magic and the arcane. Despite their efforts, the Thalmor have never been able to fully control us. We have remained a force within Altmer society, our knowledge and ways beyond their reach, ever a reminder that some things cannot be bent to the will of power alone. In recent years, the Psijic Order has quietly re-emerged, our influence spreading across Tamriel as we work to restore equilibrium in a world increasingly swayed by the Thalmor's oppressive hand. This resurgence has not gone unnoticed. The Thalmor, ever vigilant and suspicious, have intensified their scrutiny of our activities, perceiving our efforts as a direct threat to their control. There have been whispers of Thalmor agents seeking to infiltrate our ranks, their eyes and ears prying for any sign of dissent or rebellion within our order. They fear the power of the Psijics, knowing full well that our knowledge of the arcane, our mastery of the old ways, and our commitment to preserving the sanctity of Tamriel stand in stark contrast to their revisionist ambitions. The Thalmor's attempts to stifle our influence through covert operations and propaganda only serve to strengthen our resolve. Notable figures within our order have become targets, their movements closely monitored by the Thalmor. Despite this, we remain undeterred, our efforts shrouded in secrecy, our influence subtle yet profound. The Thalmor may brand us as subversive, but their accusations fall on deaf ears. For we are driven by a purpose far greater than mere politics. Our mission is one of preservation, to ensure that the knowledge and traditions of old endure, even in the face of the Thalmor's relentless pursuit of control. As tensions rise, the Thalmor find themselves increasingly frustrated, unable to grasp or eliminate the Psijic threat as easily as they might others. Our order has weathered many storms, and we are well versed in the art of survival. The Thalmor, with all their power and influence, cannot so easily suppress the ancient wisdom that we safeguard. The future is uncertain, but one thing remains clear. The Psijic Order will not yield to the Thalmor's vision of Tamriel, for we stand as a beacon of knowledge and balance in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. As the Thalmor continue to navigate the shifting sands of Tamriel's political landscape, their path forward is fraught with both peril and opportunity. The present moment stands as a crucible for the Thalmor, where internal strife and external pressures threaten to reshape their destiny. Internal dissent has become a significant concern within the Thalmor ranks. Despite their firm grip on power, cracks have appeared in their once unified front. Factions within the Thalmor have emerged, each with its own vision for the future of the Aldmeri Dominion. Some members advocate for a more pragmatic approach, recognizing the necessity of adapting to the changing dynamics of Tamriel. Others cling to more radical ideologies, seeking to reinforce the Thalmor's original goals of Elven supremacy. This fragmentation poses a risk to their cohesion and effectiveness, potentially undermining their influence across Tamriel. Externally, the Thalmor face mounting challenges from a range of adversaries. The Empire, though weakened, continues to resist Thalmor domination. The spirit of the Stormcloaks, beaten but not unbroken, have resisted the Thalmor's influence in Skyrim. Furthermore, emerging factions within Elsewhere and Valenwood, inspired by the turmoil within the Thalmor, challenge their regional dominance. These external pressures force the Thalmor to constantly adapt their strategies, balancing between aggressive enforcement and diplomatic negotiation. The Thalmor's rigid adherence to their own vision of superiority, combined with their willingness to suppress and eradicate dissent, has set them on a path toward devastation. The potential for widespread destruction and the annihilation of cultures and peoples under their harsh regime is not a distant fear, but a pressing reality that demands immediate and concerted action. To avert such a catastrophic future, it is crucial that their influence be contained and their aggressive strategies met with a unified and resolute response. This means not only addressing their immediate threats, but also dismantling the ideological framework that fuels their expansionist zeal. The future of Tamriel rests on our ability to stand together against the Thalmor menace, and to ensure that their destructive trajectory is stopped before it leads to irreversible harm. The Thalmor are more than just another faction on Tamriel. They are a nauseating, loathsome blight on the face of Nirn. Their very existence is a perversion of everything that is good and just in the world. From their heinous policies of racial supremacy to their absurd obsession with the past, these elitist zealots have warped everything they touch, leaving nothing but wretched destruction in their wake. Oh, don't let their sharp suits and gilded masks fool you into thinking they're some kind of sophisticated power. No, they are far from it. They're a group of misbegotten fools, desperately clinging to a false sense of superiority, lashing out at the world that rejects their twisted vision of Aldmeri dominance. The very air they breathe reeks of vile ambition and despicable arrogance. You can see it in their eyes, the way they look down on every other race, as if the Altmer were some kind of divine gift to Tamriel. Foul and dangerously deluded, but they do wield power, and that's what makes them so unsettling. Their influence stretches across the Empire, and with their control over the Aldmeri Dominion, they impose their contemptible will on every corner of the continent. But power alone does not justify their existence. No, their power is the result of their revolting methods, their blind, heartless pursuit of dominance. It is that power that must be feared, and more importantly, hated. I will begin with an anecdotal story to remind you of Merethic cruelty. To quote, "The wind howled across the barren, snow-covered road near Whiterun, biting through the furs and leathers of a lone Nord as he trudged through the storm. Ulfric was old, but the cold didn't faze him. He had faced much worse in his time. His boots crunched against the packed snow, the rhythmic sound a small comfort in the otherwise oppressive silence of the frozen landscape. But he wasn't alone. From the blizzard's haze, two figures emerged, dark shapes cutting through the white. They were unmistakable. The Thalmor. Their black and gold robes stood out like a cancerous growth against the starkness of the snow, their every movement suffused with an air of superiority, as if the very ground they walked on ought to worship them. Ulfric's blood boiled. He had seen their kind before, and it was never a meeting he'd welcome. They were loathsome, despicable. The Thalmor Justicar, tall and imperious, stepped forward with a sickening smile, his eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What have we here? A wretched Nord stumbling through the snow like a lost animal." Ulfric straightened himself, his old bones creaking as he stood tall despite the years weighing him down. "You're far from home, Thalmor," he spat, though his voice trembled slightly from the cold. "You've no business here." The Justicar's smile widened, and he waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, but I do, old man. You see, we are the future of Tamriel, and every last one of you is nothing but a stain on it. How unfortunate for you that you have the privilege of seeing it firsthand." Ulfric's fingers tightened around the haft of his axe, but his body was weary. He'd had many battles, many fights, but this one felt different. He was no fool. The Thalmor were powerful, their magic fierce and their conviction unshakable. "Come now, Nord. Don't make this harder on yourself." The Justicar raised his hand, and before Ulfric could react, a blast of lightning shot from his palm, striking Ulfric square in the chest. The shock was immediate and brutal, coursing through his body, seizing his muscles. The old man's legs buckled, and he collapsed into the snow, gasping for breath, his chest burning. "You still think you can resist us, don't you?" The Justicar mocked, stepping closer with slow, deliberate steps. He crouched down and grabbed Ulfric by the hair, yanking his head back to look up at him. "Your kind has always been so stubborn, so proud, but it's nothing more than a foolish death throw. Vile, really." Ulfric's head lolled to the side, blood trickling from his lips. His vision swam with spots of color as he tried to shake off the shock, but the Thalmor's grip only tightened. "You'll regret this, elf," Ulfric growled, though his voice was weak, the words barely more than a rasp. "One day, you will all fall." The Justicar chuckled darkly, as if the notion was a joke. "Foolish. You can hardly stand, and you speak of our fall. The world is changing, old man. We will crush every last one of your pitiful kind underfoot, and none of your struggles will matter. You're just a relic of the past." He raised his foot and stomped it into Ulfric's ribs, cracking bone with the force of the blow. The pain was blinding. Ulfric coughed, more blood spilling from his mouth, and for a fleeting moment he thought he might pass out. But even then, the fire inside him wouldn't die. The Thalmor could break his body, but they would never break his spirit. The Justicar, seemingly bored with the old Nord's stubbornness, lifted his boot from Ulfric's ribs. He looked down at the broken form beneath him, his lips curling in a cruel smile. "This is how it will be for all of you. One by one you will fall, and none of you will be left to resist. The wretched Nords, the weak Imperials, each of you will be crushed by the superior strength of the Aldmeri Dominion." With a final sneer, the Justicar stood, straightening his robes. "And you, old man, are nothing but an insect on the path to our glorious future." Ulfric could only watch as the Thalmor turned away, laughing softly to himself as he walked off into the blizzard, leaving Ulfric broken and bleeding in the snow. The wind howled, the cold gnawed at him, but it wasn't the frost that threatened to kill him. It was the bitter realization that the Thalmor would never stop, that their arrogance would never relent. Still, even as his body lay half-conscious on the icy ground, Ulfric clung to one truth. He was not defeated. Not yet. End quote. It should be no surprise that a faction as despicable as the Thalmor has an obsession with preserving what they consider the purity of Aldmeri bloodlines. Their fixation on keeping their race untouched by the so-called imperfections of the other races of Tamriel is not just a misguided notion of superiority, but a dangerous practice that reveals the fragility lurking beneath their pompous facade. Inbreeding is, of course, the obvious consequence of such a twisted obsession. To maintain the purity of their bloodline, the Thalmor have long been forced to intermarry, repeatedly consolidating their gene pool until it becomes little more than a puddle of fragile genetics. The very people who claim to be the pinnacle of Tamrielic civilization, the very ones who look down their noses at every other race, are plagued by physical and intellectual decay. Their own magisters, some of the most powerful and influential figures in their society, have proven to be riddled with debilitating genetic defects. These defects go beyond mere physical deformities. More troubling is the deterioration of their mental faculties, making their leaders increasingly erratic and less able to fulfill their supposed roles as rulers of Tamriel. The mindless repetition of their superiority complex, as if it's some kind of mantra, only further accelerates their internal rot. The Thalmor have created a society of sickly elites, too proud to accept the simple truth that their endless pursuit of purity is only accelerating their downfall. The more they try to perfect themselves, the more fragile they become. Their desperate attempts to sustain the illusion of strength have made them a joke. This pursuit of an illusion of purity, so deeply ingrained in the Thalmor's psyche, ultimately betrays them. The strength of the Altmer has always been their adaptability, their ability to change and grow with the times. But the Thalmor reject that. They reject evolution in favor of stagnation, clinging to the past with the desperation of a dying animal. The consequences of their obsession are far-reaching. They have not only doomed themselves, but have made the people they dominate even more vulnerable. Those who bow to the Thalmor, those who live under their oppressive regime, are forced to watch as their overlords slowly degrade, and yet they can do nothing to stop it. And it is a fate that the rest of Tamriel must ultimately watch from the sidelines, waiting for the inevitable collapse of this sick, twisted empire. What's more, the Thalmor's fashion sense is as nauseating as their politics, and it reeks of desperation. Their robes, those wretched garments of black and gold, don't just symbolize power. They scream of their desire to hide their fragility behind layers of gilded nonsense. They drape themselves in these ostentatious fabrics, desperate to make themselves appear as though they belong to some higher class of society, when in truth they are nothing more than self-important charlatans. Let's start with their color scheme. Black and gold. They think it makes them regal. It doesn't. It's an overused, tired aesthetic that reeks of insecurity. These are not the robes of an empire, but the robes of a society that fears being exposed for what it truly is. A hollow, morally bankrupt institution desperately clinging to power. They think the gold represents glory, but it's nothing more than a distraction. A shiny facade designed to cover the rot beneath. It's a vain attempt to cloak themselves in something meaningful, but all it does is highlight their ridiculous, childish pretense. Then there's the absurdity of their robes themselves. Oversized shoulder pads, too many embellishments, and intricate designs that, instead of being intimidating, make them look like theatrical props rather than rulers of an empire. They stand there, all sharp angles and flapping fabric, unable to move without drawing attention to their utter lack of practicality. They are too busy impressing their own kind with these revolting adornments to realize that the rest of Tamriel is laughing at them. They strut around like peacocks in the imperial courts, all the while forgetting that true power comes from strength of character, not the ability to wear an embroidered collar that looks like it could choke them. If you compare the Thalmor's fashion to the simple, functional attire of other Tamrielic cultures, the disparity is laughable. Nords, for example, wear practical furs and leathers suited to the harsh climate of Skyrim. They don't need to flaunt their wealth through ornate garments. They earn their respect with their actions. The Khajiit and Argonians wear what they need, designed for utility, mobility, and survival in their respective environments. And yet the Thalmor, so obsessed with projecting an image of grandeur, put themselves in clothing that is as impractical as it is absurd. Their robes say nothing about their capability and everything about their arrogance. The Thalmor's fixation on the past is more than just nostalgia. It's a destructive obsession that taints everything they touch. These self-proclaimed masters of Tamriel, with their nauseating sense of superiority, cling to a vision of Aldmeri dominance that has long since passed. It's as if they've convinced themselves that Tamriel was somehow better when their ancestors ruled, and that the only way forward is to rewind history, despite the very real, ugly consequences of trying to do so. What the Thalmor fail to understand, or more likely refuse to accept, is that the world has changed. Tamriel is no longer a realm dominated by elves, and their reign over the races of men, orcs, and beasts is a distant memory. But the Thalmor, in their delusional arrogance, refuse to acknowledge this. Instead, they chase after a golden age that only exists in their minds. The Aldmeri Dominion, the supposed golden age they yearn for, is long gone, swept away by the very elves who once ruled it. But this doesn't stop the Thalmor from trying to rekindle the fires of their imagined superiority. Their historical revisionism is horrendous. They go to remarkable lengths to whitewash the true history of the elves and rewrite it in their own image, erasing the inconvenient truths about the Aldmeri Dominion's past, including the fact that it was a brutal, oppressive regime. To the Thalmor, the truth is malleable, a tool to be bent and twisted in whatever way will serve their cause. They seek to erase the rebellions of the other races, like the Nerevarines rise against the tribunal, and paint themselves as the rightful rulers of all Tamriel, regardless of how much blood must be spilled to achieve it. The Thalmor's anti-Talos crusade is a shining example of the hypocrisy that courses through every vein of their malignant existence. At the heart of their so-called justification for their war on Talos worship lies an utterly vile contradiction. They preach about the sanctity of the Aldmeri pantheon, venerating their own divine ancestors who are no more divine than the dirt beneath their feet. And yet they seek to suppress the very faith that forged the empire they now seek to control. Talos, the once mortal god, the man who rose from the blood and grit of Tamriel's streets, is a symbol of everything the Thalmor despise. A mortal who ascended to godhood not by bloodline, not by some false claim of divinity, but through the sheer force of will, power, and the respect of his people. The Thalmor, of course, cannot tolerate this. A mere mortal ascending to godhood without divine bloodlines. Preposterous. Their fragile egos cannot handle the very idea that an ordinary man, a Nord at that, could claim divinity while they, the self-proclaimed elite of Tamriel, wallow in their pompous, self-aggrandizing delusions. So, they embark on their foul crusade, seeking to stamp out Talos worship with all the methods they can muster. Executions, surveillance, spying, and the complete eradication of any symbol of Talos's divine reign. They march into cities, cloaked in their grotesque finery, demanding the removal of Talos's statues and the burning of his shrines, their eyes burning with the fervor of their false righteousness. The audacity of it all is staggering. They seek to erase a part of Tamriel's soul, a god who has inspired countless generations of Nords and other free peoples, all in the name of maintaining their crumbling Aldmeri ideals. In the end, the Thalmor are not just a vile political force, they are a warning, a reminder of what happens when arrogance and power are allowed to run unchecked, when those who claim superiority cannot bear the weight of their own fragile egos. They are the embodiment of a sickness that infects Tamriel, a corruption that seeks to crush freedom and the very will of the people. But we are not their puppets. We never have been, and we never will be. So, the next time you hear of their despicable deeds, their revolting actions, remember this: the Thalmor's power is built on nothing more than fear and deception. And no matter how many statues they tear down, no matter how many lives they destroy, they can never break the spirit of the people. We will always resist, and in the end it is that spirit that will outlast them all. The Thalmor are not simply diplomats or rulers. They are self-proclaimed paragons of culture, and nothing demonstrates their delusions of grandeur quite like their eating habits. The food served at the Thalmor embassy is a reflection of their belief that they exist on a higher plane of existence, both physically and intellectually. To them, food isn't sustenance, it's a statement. In their eyes, the common peasant's meal of stew, bread or meat is an insult to their refined tastes. Why settle for hearty meals that serve a purpose when you can chew on something so delicate it would make Nazim venture from the Cloud District to give it a try? But that's not all. The true mark of their elitism shows in their beverage choice. The Thalmor don't drink mead like the rest of us. They partake in wines so rare they could only have been harvested by the hands of the gods themselves. Their wine isn't from Skyrim's humble vineyards, or even Cyrodiil's respectable cellars. No, this wine is so exclusive that it might as well be aged in barrels made from the very bones of extinct creatures. The glass, smaller than a sweet roll, is raised with such delicate precision you'd think they were holding a precious relic, not just a drink. And of course, they hold the glass just so, their pinky extended in a manner so unnatural it's almost offensive. When they aren't eating leaves or sipping their overpriced wine, they're reading. But not just any book. No, the Thalmor read only the finest works of literature from their glorious Somerset Isle. It's not enough for them to be superior. They must be constantly reminded of their superiority by surrounding themselves with the finest works celebrating their perfect, flawless society. No vulgar novels or common stories for them. Only works that elevate them to godhood. Most likely they don't even read. They simply flip the pages to remind themselves of how much better they are than you. And all of this, mind you, is accompanied by an unspoken judgment. As they nibble on their overpriced leaf and sip their wine, you can be sure their eyes are disdainfully scanning your peasant food, probably from across the room. They'll look at your mead and stew as though they were looking at a piece of garbage on the floor. They may not say it aloud, but the contempt in their gaze says it all. To the Thalmor, the act of eating and drinking is just another opportunity to remind you of your place beneath them. Every meal is a performance, and they are the shining stars of the show. Eating was never about survival for the Thalmor. No, it was about sending a message, a declaration of superiority. As they sat in their grandiose halls, they didn't eat to nourish their bodies, but to remind the very air around them of their unfathomable refinement. Their food? Leaves. Yes, leaves. And not just any leaves. Leaves so rare they would make any common farmer weep for their ignorance. The kind of leaves that required entire teams of servants to carefully harvest, lest a single drop of their precious sap be wasted. It wasn't about taste, it was about status. And when they weren't stuffing their faces with overpriced leaves or sipping wines fit for gods, the Thalmor would, of course, retreat into their most sacred activity, reading. But don't expect them to waste their time on anything remotely common, like, say, books written by the so-called masses of Tamriel. No, they had more refined tastes. They would read nothing less than the finest literature. And by that, I mean anything produced by the Somerset Isles. Picture it, a Thalmor agent lounging in a silk chair, a book of gold-leafed pages open before them. Not just any book, oh no, this was a tome written in an archaic language so old that the ink might as well have been forged by the gods themselves. No thrilling tales of commoners overcoming oppression. No simple stories of war and heroism. These works would praise the greatness of the Aldmeri and exalt their eternal supremacy. You could forget about any story that didn't revolve around the glory of the Aldmeri Dominion, the stories that focused on the civilizing influence of the Thalmor across the provinces. For them, anything else would be beneath their vast intellect. The plebeian tales of the Empire? Irrelevant. The sagas of the Nords or the Dunmer? Laughable. They could never sully their minds with such dreck. And don't be fooled into thinking these lofty, noble elves were actually absorbing this content. No, they'd read with the same attitude they had towards everything else, as if it was beneath them, as if they were simply confirming that no one else could reach their level. They weren't reading. They were flipping pages, scanning for anything that could reinforce their belief that truly they were the only ones worthy of ruling Tamriel. If you watched long enough, you'd probably catch them glancing at you over the top of their book, their look dripping with judgment. What could you possibly know about true culture? You, with your simple, common stories and your barely legible parchment. They would probably hum a condescending little tune to themselves, just to remind you that, no matter how hard you tried, you could never be more than a background character in the grand epic of the Aldmeri. And while the Thalmor are delicately savoring their highly refined meals, leaves drenched in sauces you wouldn't even try on your worst day, they're also using this moment to look down upon you. You, with your vulgar stew and mead, smelly and disgusting, a blight upon their perfectly curated world. The sheer audacity of it all. They push your humble plate away as if your very food has insulted them. Your hearty, rich stew is beneath them. The mead you drink, the very drink of Skyrim's proudest warriors, disgusts them. Why? Because it doesn't come from Somerset. It doesn't glow. It isn't laced with elven refinement. And they want you to know that. As they sip their fine elven wine, their noses wrinkle just a bit at the very scent of your mead, as though it's offended their delicate nostrils. Stew, really? They ask, though they don't care for your response. You're beneath them. They don't need to talk to you to know that your food choices are beneath them. The Thalmor know everything, including what not to eat. They don't need your chunky, filling food. They only eat what's rare, delicate, and deserving of their elevated status. Not that they would ever touch something common like your stew. They're too busy nibbling on bits of leaf plucked from the highest branches of some obscure tree, imported from the most exclusive corners of Tamriel. And if that doesn't show their superiority, nothing will. So let them look down on you. They have that right. They're the ruling class, the true masters of all of Tamriel. You, with your bread and butter, are nothing more than a mere afterthought in their ever-ascending reign. And you best believe, if you dare to try to teach them about your food, you'll only be met with disdain. You, the plebeian, offering the Thalmor a drink made of fermented grains. How quaint, how primitive. The following is an excerpt from a Nordic tavern near Whiterun. Real names are not used. To quote, "The tavern's interior glowed with the amber light of the hearth, its warmth battling the harsh Skyrim winds that howled outside. The crowd inside was lively but wary, the tension thick enough to cut with a dagger. Seated at the farthest corner of the establishment was a burly Nord named Bjorn, a weathered man with a long braid of flaxen hair and a beard flecked with snow. Before him on the table rested a steaming bowl of venison stew, the rich scent of herbs and meat wafting into the air. Across the room, the heavy door swung open with a grating creak. A gust of icy wind accompanied a tall, robed figure who strode inside. The room's chatter quieted as all eyes turned toward the Thalmor emissary. He was clad in flowing black and gold robes, his angular face twisted with disdain as he surveyed the room. His name was Saldian, and like most of his kin, he exuded an aura of superiority that clashed harshly with the simple, hearty atmosphere of the Nord tavern. "Ah," Saldian sneered, his voice cutting through the hushed air like a blade. "How quaint. A gathering of peasants feasting on whatever swill passes for food in this wasteland." His amber eyes swept across the patrons before landing on Bjorn. Bjorn glanced up, his jaw tightening as Saldian approached his table. The elf's thin lips curled into a smirk as he gestured toward the steaming bowl of stew. "And what's this? Nord cuisine? How utterly charming." His tone dripped with sarcasm. "It's venison stew," Bjorn replied, his voice steady but his eyes narrowing. "Made with fresh meat and herbs. Good enough for any Nord." Saldian chuckled, a hollow, mocking sound. "Good enough for a Nord indeed. I suppose that's your way of admitting it's barely fit for consumption. The ingredients alone reek of barbarism. What is that? Juniper berries? Snowberries? Do you season with weeds because you're too dim-witted to tell the difference between culinary refinement and mere survival?" Bjorn's fingers clenched around his spoon, but he held his tongue. The other patrons exchanged uneasy glances, knowing full well the consequences of provoking a Thalmor emissary. "Look at it," Saldian continued, leaning closer to the bowl, "a murky sludge of questionable origin. I've seen slop served to pigs with more elegance. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Bjorn, "call yourself proud? A proud Nord would sooner starve than degrade himself with such filth." Bjorn's jaw tightened further, but he finally set down his spoon. His blue eyes locked onto Saldian's with a glare that could freeze a river. "It may not be the fine wines and delicate pastries you Altmer fancy," he said, his voice low and firm, But it's hearty, it's warm, and it's made with respect for the land that gave it. Something your kind will never understand. Saldian's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. Typical Nord drivel, he spat. Romanticizing your backward ways, as though they hold any merit. You mistake your stubbornness for strength, your crude traditions for culture. This stew is a perfect metaphor for your people, bland, unrefined, and utterly forgettable. Bjorn rose from his seat, his broad frame towering over the Altmer. The room held its breath as he leaned forward, his voice a quiet growl. If you don't like our food, Thalmor, you're free to leave. Or is your arrogance too starved for attention that you'd rather linger where you're not wanted? Saldian straightened, his nostrils flaring as he glared at the Nord. For a moment it seemed he might retaliate, his hand hovering near the hilt of his ornate dagger. But the murmurs of the crowd and the weight of many murderous eyes dissuaded him. With a sharp huff, he turned on his heel, his robes billowing dramatically as he strode toward the door. "Enjoy your slop, Nord," he snapped over his shoulder. "It suits you." The door slammed shut behind him, and the tavern exhaled as one. Bjorn sat back down, picked up his spoon, and took a slow, deliberate bite of his stew. The rich flavors warmed him, even as the winds outside howled with fury. End quote. And don't even get me started on sweet rolls. You think it's just a dessert? No, this is where the true Thalmor hatred of the Nords comes through. That sweet roll you love, the one that represents everything that's good about Skyrim, about the Nordic spirit. The Thalmor despise it. They look at it like it's poison on a plate. Why? Because it's Nordic. It's humble, it's authentic, it's real. Something a Nord would eat after a long day of fighting for their homeland, their freedom, their culture. And the Thalmor, they can't stand it. It's everything they despise. It's the symbol of the Nord's simple, hard-earned joy, and they hate it. This isn't just about food, people. This is the Thalmor's war on everything that isn't theirs. They can't control the sweet roll, so they reject it, just like they can't control the Nords. They want to erase it all. They want the land, the people, the culture, and they can't stomach the idea that something as simple as a sweet roll stands as a monument to everything they'll never understand. This is their war. This is about domination, about suppressing anything that doesn't fit their perfect, glowing elven vision. You see the hatred in their eyes when they dismiss a sweet roll. That's the same hatred they have for the Nords. For us. Wake up, people. The Thalmor embassy in Solitude stood as a gilded façade, its polished exterior hiding the rot festering within. The so-called diplomats who occupied its halls weren't negotiating for peace or the prosperity of Skyrim. No, they were architects of cruelty, plotting to dismantle the land piece by piece, all while cloaked in lies. The Empire may have signed the White Gold Concordat, but inside those walls, the Thalmor were already rewriting Skyrim's future, one betrayal at a time. Those Altmer fanatics strutted about as though they were gods among mortals, sneering down their noses at the people they deemed inferior. They weren't interested in compromise. Why would they be? In their eyes, the Nords were just unruly barbarians standing in the way of an elven utopia. And let's not forget their view of the Empire, a weakened puppet state, spineless after the Great War, dancing to their tune. It's not diplomacy, it's humiliation. It's conquest without the courtesy of a sword fight. Within the embassy's stone walls, the Thalmor weren't drafting treaties, they were drafting hit lists. They spied on Jarl Ulfric and the Stormcloaks, tracked imperial generals, and kept detailed dossiers on every dissident who dared oppose them. Everyone was a target. The outspoken, the rebellious, even the innocents caught in the crossfire. They infiltrated Skyrim's courts, manipulated its politics, and ensured that no resistance could gain a foothold without the Thalmor knowing and crushing it. And yet, they had the gall to call themselves keepers of peace. Peace. There's no peace in the Thalmor embassy, only scheming, only fear. They didn't come to Skyrim to talk, they came to remind the Nords, the Empire, and anyone else foolish enough to challenge them who holds the leash. You walk by those gates in solitude, and you're not passing a diplomatic mission. You're passing the belly of the beast, a beast that feeds on Skyrim's freedom while plotting to devour the rest of Tamriel. The Thalmor fancy themselves the pinnacle of civilization, the rightful rulers of Tamriel. But strip away their robes and honeyed words, and you'll see them for what they are, tyrants cloaked in gold. These so-called Aldmeri diplomats are nothing more than fanatical supremacists, drunk on their own delusions of superiority. They don't just believe they're better than Nords, Bretons, or Imperials. They believe humanity itself is an aberration, a mistake to be corrected by their divine hand. This isn't some petty political ambition. The Thalmor are driven by an ancient and unrelenting hatred, one born of their belief that the mortal races, particularly men, stole the world from them. To the Thalmor, the existence of humanity is a blight on the face of creation, and Skyrim is just another battlefield in their holy war to purify Tamriel. They see Nords not as people, but as cattle, something to subdue and discard. Their arrogance knows no bounds. The Thalmor claim credit for every advancement, every civilization, as if nothing of value could exist without them. Yet they look down from their ivory towers, blind to the resilience and might of those they sneer at. They dismiss the ancient Nord heroes, the sacrifices of Tiber Septim, and the strength of the people who carved Skyrim from ice and stone. To them, Nord culture is primitive and beneath notice, save for when it stands in their way. But let us not mistake their disdain for passivity. The Thalmor have weaponized their hatred into an ideology that infects everything they touch. Their embassy in solitude is proof enough. This is no simple diplomatic mission. It's a nerve center for their operations, a breeding ground for plots and schemes designed to break Skyrim's will. They infiltrate with spies, sow discord between allies, and twist every opportunity to tighten their grip on the land. The Thalmor's hatred isn't just ideological, it's systematic, deliberate, and executed with precision. Their ultimate goal isn't peace and it isn't order, it's domination, the complete erasure of humanity's legacy. To the Thalmor, you are not an equal, not even an enemy worthy of respect. You are an obstacle in their divine crusade, and they will stop at nothing to grind you into dust beneath their gilded boots. The Thalmor embassy in solitude was not a diplomatic outpost. It was the beating heart of their insidious machine. It stood as a fortress of subterfuge, where every whisper, every shadow, served their obsessive lust for control. They called themselves emissaries, envoys of peace, but the truth was far uglier. This place was where the real war was fought, through manipulation, blackmail, and betrayal. The embassy functioned as the Thalmor's nerve center for their operations in Skyrim. From here, they spied on imperial officials, dug their claws into local politics, and played puppet master to keep both the Empire and the Stormcloaks in perpetual disarray. Every conflict, every division, it was orchestrated by these Elven supremacists, ensuring that neither side could stand united against them. The Thalmor didn't just watch, they acted. They infiltrated guilds, bribed officials, and twisted alliances to serve their goals. No one was too small to escape their notice, and no secret was too trivial. Whether it was a petty jarl or a prominent general, the Thalmor gathered information with a cold, calculated efficiency. If you were a threat to their plans, they knew your name before you even realized you had become their enemy. They operated with impunity, shielded by diplomatic immunity, laughing at the laws of men. The embassy was more than just a building. It was a fortress of lies, a place where they stored every piece of leverage they could use to tighten their stranglehold on Skyrim. Documents filled with names, weaknesses, and secrets sat in their vaults, waiting to be weaponized. And if you ever wondered why certain dissidents disappeared or why rebellions fizzled out before they began, you'd find your answer in the Thalmor's meticulous planning. And what did they do with their spies and agents? They worked them to death, turning even loyal operatives into expendable pawns. The Thalmor didn't care who they burned, so long as their path to dominance was paved in the ashes of their enemies. Every secret uncovered and every life ruined was just another stepping stone toward their vision of an elven utopia. A vision where men, Nords especially, were nothing more than an afterthought. The Thalmor embassy reeks of cruelty, both in purpose and in action. Inside those walls, they don't deal in diplomacy, they deal in terror. Their methods are not refined, they are not justifiable. They are brutal, calculated, and without mercy. Anyone dragged into that building, willingly or otherwise, is unlikely to leave whole, if they leave at all. The Thalmor don't interrogate, they torture. They break people. The screams echoing through their hidden chambers aren't just an unfortunate byproduct of war. They are the tools of the Dominion's tyranny. These so-called agents of order have perfected the art of pain, drawing out every last ounce of information, or just ensuring their victims never find the courage to resist again. To the Thalmor, a broken spirit is more valuable than a corpse, though they've produced plenty of both. In the diplomatic immunity operation, the Dragonborn uncovers a stark reminder of their depravity. Prisoners, subjected to relentless suffering, starved and forgotten in their dungeons. What crime justifies this torment? Possessing the wrong information, supporting the wrong faction. Sometimes simply existing in defiance of the Dominion's perfect world. Malbon, the Bosmer informant, describes what it's like to work among them. Fear and paranoia run so thick that betrayal becomes a survival tactic. Let's not forget the case of Etienne Ranis, left to rot within the embassy's claws. Broken, humiliated, yet alive, barely. His only mistake, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Thalmor didn't even care if he had the information they wanted. His suffering was a message, an example of what happens to those who even brush against opposition. The following is an excerpt taken from an undisclosed individual in the employ of the Thalmor embassy. To quote, "I've been cleaning the Thalmor embassy in solitude for 2 years now. They call me wench, but I'm just a woman trying to keep my head down and earn enough septims to survive. The Nords here hate me because I'm not one of them, and the Thalmor, well, they don't even see me. To them, I'm invisible, and sometimes I wish I truly was. The first time I saw something, it was an accident. I was scrubbing the floors near one of the locked rooms. The elf's screams made me freeze. Not because I was startled, I've heard shouting before, but because of the sound. It was the kind of scream that doesn't stop echoing in your head. High, desperate, like the noise an animal makes when it knows it's about to die. The kind of scream you pray never escapes your own throat. The door cracked open just enough for me to see inside. 2 Thalmor justiciars stood over a young Nord man, his robes tattered and soaked in blood. He wasn't bound, not with rope. No, they used magic. His arms and legs hovered in place, twisted unnaturally. His pale, weathered skin was marred with deep, glowing cuts, runes that pulsed as if alive. One of the justiciars, a woman with a face like carved ice, leaned in close to him. "Tell us what you know about the blades," she hissed. He didn't answer. He just stared, eyes unfocused, muttering something I couldn't hear. She snapped her fingers, and the runes flared. He convulsed so hard, I thought his spine would snap. "Clean this up," another voice barked behind me. I hadn't noticed the second door opening. A Thalmor officer shoved a blood-stained rag into my hands and pointed toward the hallway. I stumbled back, nodding, clutching the rag like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I dared one last glance at the room. The tortured man had slumped forward, unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell. They didn't seem to care. After that day, I learned to keep my eyes down and my ears closed. But it's impossible to ignore everything. The embassy reeks of death in places they don't let the dignitaries see. The screams come almost every night, muffled but unmistakable. Sometimes they bring in prisoners blindfolded, their clothes torn and their faces swollen with bruises. Sometimes they're dragged out limp, leaving trails of blood behind them. And the Thalmor, they laugh. They laugh like it's a game. Last week I was ordered to clean a room no one else would touch. When I opened the door, the stench hit me so hard I almost vomited. The walls were splattered with something dark, almost black in the dim light. The table in the center of the room had restraints on it, still slick with, I don't want to say it. There were scratches in the wood, deep grooves like someone had clawed at it with bare hands. On the floor, I found a tooth, just lying there. I've tried to leave. I've tried to quit. But the Thalmor don't let people go that easily. They know I've seen too much. If I disappear, who's going to care? Just another servant, another nameless body to throw in a ditch. They've made sure I'm trapped here, just like they're prisoners. And all I can do is keep cleaning, keep pretending I'm too stupid to understand what's happening around me. But I understand. I see it every time I scrub their floors, every time I hear another scream. The Thalmor aren't here to keep order. They're here to destroy. They're monsters hiding behind gold and silk, and someday, I hope Skyrim remembers that. Because if the people of this land don't fight back, there won't be anything left worth saving." End quote. What's more, the Thalmor's obsession with the Dragonborn runs deeper than simple opposition. To them, the Dragonborn is not a mere hero of prophecy, but a wild card in their carefully laid plans for domination. They know what you are, an anomaly, a threat to their authority, and potentially the only being capable of upsetting their fragile control over Skyrim and beyond. The Thalmor have been watching you long before you knew who you were. Their network of spies is vast, and their agents have infiltrated every corner of Skyrim, gathering scraps of information about your every move. From the moment whispers of your existence began to spread, the Thalmor have been calculating. Their embassy is more than a lair of torture. It is a vault of secrets, much of it centered on you. Documents uncovered in the embassy during the diplomatic immunity mission reveal they have been tracking your connections to the Blades, your actions in Helgen, and even your ties to Alduin. Their paranoia knows no bounds. But it is not merely fear that drives them. The Thalmor see the Dragonborn as a tool, a weapon they could turn to their advantage if properly manipulated. Why destroy you outright when they could bend your power to their will? Their arrogance blinds them to the reality of your independence. They believe that through control, coercion, or outright blackmail, they can tame the soul of a dragon. Their efforts to gather intelligence aren't just precautionary. They are an attempt to find the strings they can pull to make you dance to their tune. And yet, they're terrified of what they don't understand. The power to consume dragon souls, the ancient Thuum. These are forces that no amount of political scheming can replicate or suppress. They've seen the power of Talos and what a mortal elevated to godhood can do. They know the Dragonborn walks a similar path, and it terrifies them. This is why their hatred burns so fiercely. In their minds, you are not just a threat to their plans, you are a living testament to the failure of their ideology. For the Thalmor, the Dragonborn represents everything they despise: unpredictability, mortal ambition, and the audacity of humanity to rise above its supposed place. They would rather destroy you outright than risk the chance that you could shatter their dreams of a world dominated by the Aldmeri Dominion. You've glimpsed the darkness that festers within the Thalmor embassy. But now, the choice is yours. Their influence runs deep, spanning generations, woven into the very fabric of Tamriel's history. If you are to stand against them, you must rise up, for silence is their ally. The web they've spun will trap you if you hesitate. Fight back with every ounce of your strength, for only those who challenge the shadows can hope to break free. Do not think their grip is weak. It is ancient, and it is powerful. But you are more than a pawn. You are the storm that may yet tear their empire asunder. So stand tall, for the battle has only just begun. The first sign of Narifin's arrival was the silence. It wasn't the peace of the morning, nor the calm before a storm. It was the absence of sound, the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. And then came the thunder. Not the rumble of distant battle, but the relentless march of an army that would spare no one. In the shadows of Cyrodiil's great cities, Lord Narifin rose from obscurity, a figure cloaked in the kind of malice that could only be bred by the heart of the Thalmor. There was something cold about him, something chilling that made men tremble at the mere mention of his name. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, saw beyond the battlefield, beyond the bloodshed. To Narifin, the war wasn't about conquest, it was about a vision. The vision of an Aldmeri empire where all others were subjugated, their lives nothing more than pawns to be moved and discarded at will. Narifin was a predator. He didn't need to scream orders to be heard. His presence alone was enough to command the unyielding loyalty of his forces. He didn't fight for glory or honor. He fought to break those who opposed him. His mind was a labyrinth of dark strategy, each move carefully planned to instill fear, to unhinge the minds of those who dared resist. There was no honor in his campaigns, only the cold, relentless march of annihilation. He took joy not in victory, but in watching the will of his enemies wither away beneath his iron fist. He was a shadow that crept across the land, unseen, unfeeling, until his forces suddenly descended upon the unprepared cities of Cyrodiil. The walls of Leowyn fell before they even had time to scream, and Bravil, once a beacon of defiance, was ground into dust beneath the weight of his war machine. It was said that Narifin smiled when he saw the devastation, not because of his victory, but because of the terror it wrought. Every corner he turned, every city he razed, he felt the power of control surge through him like an intoxicating drug. He wasn't just invading cities, he was breaking the spirit of an entire people. To him, they were nothing more than tools. The citizens of Cyrodiil, the soldiers who fought against him, they were vermin. His vision of the Aldmeri Dominion was one where nothing and no one stood in the way of the Thalmor's ultimate power. His soldiers followed his lead without question, for they too were swept up in his dark charisma, his promise of a new order where the Ultima would reign supreme and the world would be reshaped in their image. And through it all, Narifin never faltered. His will was unshakable, as if he knew that nothing, not the cries of the innocent, not the defiant shout of a warrior, could stop him. He was beyond fear, beyond mercy. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was a force of nature. Lord Narifin's role in the Great War was nothing short of catastrophic. A master strategist and brutal leader, he spearheaded the invasion that sent shockwaves through Cyrodiil. His first strike was swift. Leowyn fell within days, followed quickly by Bravil. The cities were devastated, and their people were left with nothing but the memories of their once great homes. Narifin didn't waste time. By 4th Era 172, his forces had surrounded the imperial city, cutting off every escape route save one, the path to Bruma, the last shred of hope for the Empire. It was a classic maneuver, a textbook example of how to break an enemy's spirit. The city's defenses, already stretched thin, were forced into a desperate holding pattern, praying for reinforcements that would never come. The desperation in the air was palpable. The people of Cyrodiil, knowing that their fate was now in the hands of the Thalmor. As Narifin's forces marched forward, every inch of the imperial city was a battleground. Inside the walls, chaos reigned. The proud capital of the empire fell like a toy under the foot of a giant. Its ancient walls cracked and crumbled as Narifin's forces poured in like a flood. Narifin's ultimate goal was more than just conquest. He sought to annihilate the empire and remake Tamriel in the image of the Thalmor. The ritual he initiated, known as the cunning, was the terrifying climax of his ambitions. This wasn't just some military strategy, it was a prophecy, a dark pact with forces from beyond, and a plan to unleash the full fury of oblivion upon the unsuspecting masses of Cyrodiil. This wasn't a simple battle or a siege. It was an apocalyptic vision, one that would scorch the land and leave nothing behind but ash. The culling was a twisted ritual that sought to summon the fires of oblivion, to bring the very chaos of the Daedric princes into the mortal realm. It was Narifin's belief that by unleashing these hellish forces, the Aldmeri Dominion would rise as the uncontested ruler of Tamriel. And what of the Empire, the bones of Cyrodiil, left smouldering in the wake of this infernal plan, would serve as a grim foundation for a new world order. Rumors had spread before the ritual even began. Some claimed Narifin had made contact with the Daedric lords themselves, particularly Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction. Was this just a power-hungry general, or had Narifin truly lost himself to madness, willing to sacrifice not just his enemies, but the very souls of his people to achieve his vision of purity? The very thought of the Thalmor unleashing such forces in their pursuit of godhood was enough to make anyone with a shred of sanity recoil in disgust. But Narifin wasn't a fool. He knew the power of oblivion was a double-edged sword. What he planned wasn't a simple act of destruction. It was an attempt to reshape reality itself, to break the chains of the mortal realm, and bring the Daedric lords into a new order, one where they ruled, unchallenged. This was the final step in the Dominion's great design, complete annihilation of all who defied them. Those who still worshipped Talos, those who resisted their unrelenting will, they were mere insects to be crushed underfoot. And the culling was the weapon that would do it. The whispers of Daedric influence had long surrounded the Thalmor, and Narifin's ritual only confirmed what many had feared. The Dominion was playing with forces beyond their comprehension. They weren't just a threat to the Empire, they were a threat to the very fabric of existence itself. The Battle of the Red Ring was the turning point, the moment when the Empire's last hope crushed the Thalmor's ambitions. Narifin had come too close to victory. By the time the battle began, his forces had encircled the Imperial city. The city had fallen to chaos. Looting, murder, and destruction were the order of the day. Narifin, a fanatic with a mind consumed by his thirst for power, was mere steps away from completing his catastrophic ritual, which would have brought about an end to the Empire and plunged Tamriel into eternal darkness. But this time, the Thalmor's relentless march was halted, not by diplomacy, not by appeasement, but by the sheer force of arms. Emperor Titus Mede II, who had been all but absent from the battlefield until then, led his troops in a desperate strike, a counter-offensive that came at the last possible moment. Together with the forgotten hero, who, legend tells us, was the embodiment of resolve, they began to close in on the Dominion forces. The tide of battle shifted. The Thalmor, who prided themselves on their discipline and superiority, suddenly found themselves besieged on all sides. Narifin, confident and nearly triumphant, now had nowhere to turn. His grand prophecy was left unfinished. His victory was snatched from him at the very precipice of success. It was the moment that the Empire stood as one, facing the nightmare of destruction the Thalmor sought to bring. But the forgotten hero's sword was true, and Titus Mede's legions, no matter how battered, were resolute. As Narifin's forces crumbled, so did his plans. The ritual that would have torn the very fabric of Tamriel apart was stopped before it could reach its horrifying conclusion. A moment of victory, but one that would not come without its costs. Many died that day, lives lost in the bloodied streets, in the crumbling walls of the Imperial city, under the shadow of the White Gold Tower. Had it not been for that final stand, had Narifin succeeded, the history of Tamriel would have been rewritten in ash and blood. Instead, the Thalmor were forced to retreat, their dreams of dominance shattered. They had underestimated the resolve of the Empire, the stubborn will of those who would not bend. Narifin's ambition died with him, but his defeat didn't end the threat of the Thalmor. Not by a long shot. The following is an excerpt from a veteran legionnaire from the battle to quote, "The sun had long set over the imperial city, but its light was still reflected in the blood-stained streets. The city, once the jewel of Tamriel, now stood as a hollow shell of what it had been, consumed by the crushing weight of the Dominion's siege. Even the most defiant had surrendered, broken by the relentless onslaught, and yet despite all that had been lost, the flames of hope still flickered, hidden beneath the rubble. I remember that night as if it was yesterday. The Battle of the Red Ring was at its peak, and the Dominion's forces had all but claimed victory. We had been trapped for months, the city surrounded, our backs against the wall. Our supplies were running low, our soldiers dying by the day, and our last hope rested on one man, Emperor Titus Mede II. I was a lowly soldier, just a face among the throngs of imperial legionnaires fighting tooth and nail to hold the line. We had been battered and broken, and yet somehow we fought on. The Dominion's banners flew high in every corner of the city, mocking us as they looted and burned. We had no choice but to hold our ground. To lose the imperial city meant the end of the empire. And then, as the night grew darker, I saw him, Titus Mede II in the flesh. Amidst the chaos, the emperor emerged from the shadows of the white gold tower. His face was worn, his armor battered, but his eyes, those eyes, were as sharp and determined as ever. There was no hesitation in his steps, no fear in his presence. He had been in this war from the start, fighting for everything he believed in, and this night, in that moment, he was a symbol of defiance. The Dominion had all but won, yet here was the Emperor, leading us not from some distant throne, but from the front lines. He knew the city was on the brink of collapse, that our forces were scattered and demoralized, and yet he did not waver. Titus stood tall, with the same unyielding resolve he'd carried throughout the war. He rallied the remaining imperial soldiers, his voice ringing clear through the madness of battle. "Stand with me," he cried, "for the Empire, for the future of Tamriel." It was a call to arms, not just for us soldiers, but for every citizen who had witnessed the horrors of the past few months. His words ignited something inside us, a fire we had thought extinguished. The Emperor, this symbol of strength, was not surrendering. He would not bow to the Thalmor. With renewed vigor, we turned the tide. The Dominion's forces had been stretched too thin, overconfident in their victory. They had underestimated us. They thought we were finished, but under the Emperor's banner, we fought as if the gods themselves were at our backs. The battle raged on, but it was no longer a matter of survival. It became a matter of victory. I will never forget the moment when we breached their lines. The look on Narifin's face, the shock, the disbelief as his forces began to retreat. The general who had thought he'd already won, his empire of ash crumbling before him. It was Titus Mede II who had turned the tide, who had made the impossible happen. He led us from the front, not as a distant monarch, but as a leader, a true emperor. That night, we did not just fight for survival. We fought for vengeance, for the honor of the empire, for the people who had been crushed beneath the heel of the Thalmor. And as the sun rose the next morning, casting its first light over the scarred city, we knew one thing for certain: the Thalmor had been defeated. But that victory was not just ours. It was Titus Mede's. The Emperor had saved the Empire, and for that, we would remember him forever. The Thalmor may think themselves invincible, but they will never know the strength of a people who fight for their home. We will rise again, as long as we have leaders like Emperor Titus II." End quote. Narifin's end came swiftly after his defeat at the Battle of the Red Ring, but it was anything but clean. This wasn't just a military loss, it was a humiliation. The Thalmor, in all their arrogance, had tasted victory, and then, just as they believed the final stroke was within their grasp, the ground was ripped from beneath them. Captured and bound, Narafin was dragged through the streets of the imperial city in chains, a cruel spectacle for all to witness. It was a rare moment of reckoning for the Thalmor, a reminder that they were not gods, that the will of the Empire still carried weight, despite their dreams of supremacy. He was hung from the white gold tower, his body left on display for 33 days. It was a message to the Thalmor, to the Dominion, to anyone who dared challenge the Empire. No one, not even the mightiest of their ranks, would escape the wrath of the Empire's justice. But the story didn't end there. On the 34th day, something strange occurred. A flying Daedra, as the rumors claimed, came to retrieve Narafin's body. Whether it was a grotesque ritual, some unholy pact with the Daedric princes, or just another piece of Thalmor myth, no one can say for sure. But one thing is certain, the event sent shockwaves through Cyrodiil. The Daedra's involvement in his fate only fueled the whispers. Was Narafin truly dead? Or had he simply been whisked away by dark forces to return one day? Had he truly been defeated? Or was this a mere delay in the Thalmor's inevitable rise? Even in death, Narafin left a mark on Tamriel that couldn't be erased. His actions were not the erratic schemes of a madman, but a calculated step in the Thalmor's larger, devastating goal to reshape the world according to their twisted vision. And though he perished, the spirit of the Thalmor, their ambition, their contempt for the rest of Tamriel, remained as dangerous as ever. The shadow of Narafin still looms over the Empire, for the Thalmor do not forgive, nor do they forget. You may think Narafin is gone. You may think his twisted reign ended with his hanging, but know this, the Thalmor are eternal. Their corruption festers beneath every stone of the Empire, waiting for the moment to strike again. Narafin was but a taste, a glimpse of the nightmare they wish to bring. They are not gods, but they will make you bow before them all the same. Mark my words, as long as the Thalmor breathe, the fires of